Okay, we're just going to wait a few minutes while people are entering the
Okay.
our.
They're all saying hi over here on the list.
Yes, they
We
are.
can say hi, Peter, if he's listening. I don't know if he's there or not. So there he is. Peter's a great guy.
Hey, Colette, nice to see you here. Hi, Peter.
Oh, they're taking your background hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah.
So sunny in Rochester. Donna's there. Yep, Donna's a great gal.
Hey, Donna. Hey, Sean. Okay, let's jump right
We
in.
got some Ireland there too. Carl Graff from Ireland's
Oh,
famous microscopist just logged in. Steve Gerard, another great guy.
all right. I want to make sure that I'm being sensitive to everyone's time. So why don't we jump right in? Hi, I'm Kelly Redder, Executive Director of the Joseph M. Labazo Alumni House on the RIT campus. And while the house is currently closed through to June 2021, possibly beyond, we are taking reservations, and I encourage you to check out our website in the chat box as you think about your future family gatherings, class reunions, business meetings, and conferences. A visit's a wonderful way to reacclimate to RIT, and frankly, parking is a dream, if I do say so myself. Many in our RIT family have asked how they can help our students and the university in light of all that's happening in the world. We're incredibly grateful for those offers. There are two ways you can help. First, our new graduates and current students are seeking positions for full-time careers in co-ops. If your company is hiring, please contact RIT's Career Services Office and allow them to post that position in our systems. In addition, there is now an unprecedented need for financial aid scholarships for both our in-person and our virtual Tiger students. In honor of our special guest tonight, we'd like to highlight the Biomed Photo General Support Fund as a giving option for you. Those dollars assist with research projects in the College of Art and Design and support of the high-speed photography lab. If you are able, please make a gift at the link in the chat box. Thank you. Now, just a few housekeeping points. All attendees have joined in mute mode. However, your questions can be entered in the chat or question boxes at any time throughout the discussion. We'll make every effort to address all of your comments and questions throughout the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you in the coming weeks. If you have any technical questions, please feel free to type those into the chat box as well, and we'll do our best to get you the appropriate answers. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Labazo Alumni House as part of the Club McKenzie series, celebrating wit, wisdom, inspiration, and intellectual stimulation with your favorite RIT faculty. This evening's faculty member is Ted Kinsman, who has worked as an optical engineer, a physicist, and a physics instructor before joining RIT to teach the technical side of imaging. Ted teaches classes in photographic instrumentation where students control cameras with microprocessors, attend a class of high-speed imaging where students would photograph bullets in flight, and a class on scanning electron microscopes. He's published numerous articles and books, and most recently, Cannabis, Marijuana Under the Microscope. In a brief conversation we had just yesterday, I learned too that he worked for Dr. Pepper, one of my faves. Now on to our webinar, Cannabis to Coffee Printers. Ted, thank you so very much for joining us. The Tiger audience is all yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen, and we'll start up a PowerPoint here, and hopefully you can all see that. Is that okay so far? What I'm gonna, this is the Club McKenzie talk, and the background here is from a project that I did a little while ago, which is looking at lights on pendulums to get harmonic patterns. which is kind of a fun little optical math project. I cut down a lot of slides here. I started with over a couple hundred slides, and I was told I did not have 4 hours to talk. So it's a lot shorter. I specialize in all kinds of imagery, and here's an X-ray of a lobster. It's been false colorized. A lot of my work does not have color to it, so I have to spend a lot of time with Photoshop and put color on it. Color sells a lot better than black and white, so hence there's color added. You can see more of my pictures on sciencephotography.com. I'm also represented by a lot of stock agencies, so if you do a search on my name, you'll find those. And I'm on Instagram. For what it's worth, there's an Instagram thing there, so you can poke around and look at that if you want. So I do a lot of different kinds of imagery that are scientific based, and the goal here is to show pretty much young people or people in general about science, and trying to use images to engage people to be interested in science. So here's an X-ray of a Hasselblad camera. This is kind of an interesting model of film cameras, because this is the model that was modified to go to the moon. So so this is a very long exposure in X-ray, and I really like X-ray work because it's not very common, and you can't do it with a cell phone. So things that you do with X-rays are unique. Like all X-rays, there's no color to it, so this has to be added in Photoshop. So along the way, I've gotten pretty good at Photoshop, and it's taken a lot of time. I really like plants a lot. I started doing real technical photography, building time-lapse cameras. So I really have a lot of experience with working with plants. And this is an X-ray of one of our local pitcher plants, which is a carnivorous strain of plants. And they're all separately X-rayed and then put together in Photoshop and colorized in Photoshop, which is a real pain. But sometimes when you end up with a really nice picture like this, the hassle is worth it. So I do specialized images and X-ray work, and sometimes I get a little bit obsessed with projects. In the world of X-ray, there's one material that X-rays go through better than anything else, and that's aluminum. And I really like coffee a lot. So these are historic aluminum coffee percolators. And you can get these in flea markets for about $1 or $2 each. And heaven help you if the local vendors start to realize that you collect these, because they will save them for you for $2 or $3 each. And you'll end up with leaving the flea markets with giant black bags full of coffee percolators. Anyhow, I put together a couple of posters of these, and I've had some fun with them. And you can see they're all different versions here. Maybe some of these you used as a kid, and the lower left corner is one of our glass coffee percolators from Corning. So all these images, a lot of editorial stuff that's used to explain here electricity is hitting film. One of those fun projects I like messing around with. I also do a lot of high-speed stuff, and you know, there's one thing to freeze motion, but there's another aspect of high speed is being able to catch the motion exactly at the right time. And this is actually a friend of mine, Chris Young, who teaches high school physics and chemistry in Rush Henrietta, and he's a great guy, and he's always up. You say, hey, I need someone to do this, and he's right there. So this is a balloon that's in the process of being overpressured and ripping, and it's being photographed just as it rips apart. So that's kind of a fun thing. It's great to engage kids with these kinds of activities. When I say kids, college students. And making the invisible visible, and here's Schillerian imaging to show heat coming off a candle flame. And one of the local recent projects is soap films in motion. So you wonder, where do these projects end up? Here's an album cover. There's actually album covers still done, which I find a really kind of surprising thing. And also, in this case, textbook covers. And this is the cover of one of our textbooks that we use in the department, written by Nanette Shavazio. It's a great book too, if you need a book on photographic materials and processes. So since there's cannabis in the title of this talk, I guess I better talk about cannabis. This is a book that I did about 2 years ago, and it's all talking about cannabis or marijuana, and it's a close-up of a plant. So for a long time, I'd wanted to do a microscopic study of just one specimen and cover it from every aspect of the specimen and under a microscope. And thinking about all the different kinds of specimens I could talk about, it came up that maybe people would be interested in cannabis or marijuana. And so I had some trouble locating plants of good enough quality and chopping them up into little bits and putting them underneath every single microscope that I could imagine, which is kind of interesting because I used to have a scanning electron microscope in my living room, and matter of fact, it's exactly the same location that this computer is right now, but it's no longer here. So first off, a little bit about marijuana. It's growing in popularity, and in many states it's legal now. And there's two different kinds of plants. There's a male plant and a female plant. And the female plant is the plant that's responsible for making large amounts of THC. And THC is the active component that people consume to get high. So under a light microscope, these are little tiny nodules of THC that cover the surfaces of the leaves. And these are called glandular trichomes. And this is the highest concentration of the chemical THC. And this is what they look like under an optical microscope. And it's, it's like, not such great pictures. And I could take better pictures if I spent more time on it. But this is what has to happen. Each of the specimens are cut off. This is a part of a female flower bud on the left and part of a seedling on the right. And these are put on scanning electron microscope stubs, and each stub is about the size of a dime. They have to be dry. That means they have to go through a chemical process to remove all the water. The sample on the left is not conductive, but the one on the right has been gold coated. So that makes, that lets you know what the steps are for putting into the scanning electron microscope. So a lot of work goes into sample preparation. The more time you spend on it, the better samples you have, the better your pictures will be, which is really the situation with all microscope work. So if you have a really fresh sample and you've cryo-freezed it with liquid nitrogen, you can get a picture like this. But this kind of picture alone, I think it's really great, but the world of microscope pictures and science, they really want color. So you have to colorize this. And this is what I did with Photoshop. So this picture goes into this picture within about 45 minutes or an hour of Photoshop work. And this shows some of the surface detail of a marijuana leaf. The purple globular things are the high concentrations of THC or CBDs. They're very similar structures. Depending on if the plant's been bred for the different chemicals. And there's little defensive thorns lower down in the leaf. Each one of these purple glands is about a little bit thicker than a human hair. So they're pretty small. And that's the beauty of a scanning electron microscope.
Ted, this is Kelly. We have a question about your SEM.
Okay.
Wondering where it went. Do you have it in the closet, in school, in your car?
Guys, gotta ask these things. It's about the size. It's about 2,000 pounds, and it's no longer in the living room. That's because the main power supply has died, and I sent it to the scrapyard. It was a 1982 vintage. It was a Cambridge S200, but I have kept one of the final objectives over here on the floor. Because everybody needs a doorstop. So this is the bottom lens of the column. It's it's missing out of there. And this piece weighs about 30 pounds. And that's one of the optics cavities for the electrons in that. So it's good for, it's good for absolutely nothing, but maybe if I had a door in my living room, it would hold the door open. But that's, I had it there for 10 years. You get kind of attached to it. So I do miss having an electron microscope in my living room, but.
You're getting quite the response here. It's the question was originally from Jillian Gale, but Elizabeth Marchion says this is the saddest thing she's heard all day.
Well,
is how she describes you.
That's at the end, you got to walk away. It's like having a scanning electron microscope in your living room is comparable to having maybe a Model T that you're going to drive. For every hour you use it, you have to spend an hour or two fixing it. So it gets to a point where you just can't fix it anymore, and it's time to move on. And that my old machine got to that point. So I felt a little tear of sadness, but I do have a nice doorstop now from the stainless steel leftover.
Thor Kinsman would like to know if you have a SEM at RIT.
I do have a couple at RIT, but some of the other universities in town have better ones. So, and
thank you.
Lots of great guys to talk to and visit with. So the scanning electron microscope people are really wonderful people. This project went from every aspect of the plant, and here's a seed of a marijuana plant or cannabis plant, just as it sprouts. But unfortunately, it had to get hit with liquid nitrogen and dried out, so it will never. A lot of plants were sacrificed for this project. One of the things these plants are all really toxic. The THC is quite toxic, and they think that that it evolved to kill insects on the surface of plants. So the plant is really covered in spines and toxins to keep insects and everybody else away from the leaves. And this is a plant leaf that's about maybe a day old. So it's even from the start of growing, the plants are thorny, and they're covered with all sorts of things to deter insects and attack. We got on a little bit older plant. In this case, is about 4 or 5 days old, and it already starts to have these little glands of THC, although the concentrations aren't very high yet. They reach their maximum concentrations with an adult female plant at around 10 to 11 weeks old. So here's a little leaf out of a bud of a female plant, and it's covered in these little sacs of THC. And of course, keep in mind that this is originally it's a black and white image when I collected it, and all these structures are green. So you think, well, if I can color them any color, and this is a book about marijuana, and people use marijuana to get high, let's have party colors and add all sorts of crazy colors to it. So that was my reasoning. If I just changed them to light green and everything else green, I don't know, it'd probably be more realistic, but I guess that's artistic license, I think they call that. There's a huge
question.
Oh yeah, I can't see the questions here, so.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
I'm interrupting. Do you know when humans discovered how to cultivate the plant to get the THC benefits?
Oh, man, that's a can of worms. I am not going there. They don't even know. There's recent research that they think it came from the Himalayas or somewhere in northern India, but it's still open for debate. There's going to be a lot more genetic work with marijuana, it has been in the last few years, but continue on. There's huge amounts of research on where it came from and thoughts on that. But as far as I know, researchers have not nailed down when or where, but sometime way in the back of history, it started. One of the things we should talk a little bit about, this is on all the previous pictures, each of those little glands, there's only one per stalk. But the plants are under such huge amounts of pressure from breeding to get as much THC per plant as possible that many of the new mutations have 2 glandular cells per stalk. And researchers are looking for 3 or 4 per stalk. And I suspect they're out there, just no one's photographed them yet. And so here's 2 per stalk on this specimen. And marijuana doesn't, it's not like a normal plant where it involves an insect pollinating. It pollinates by wind or air. And this is a one single pollen, and it's about 70 microns across, which means it's about the size of a human hair. And it was one of the trickier pictures because I had to prepare a whole bunch of samples. The pollen comes from the male plant. The male plant's the plant that nobody wants to grow. If you have one male plant in your greenhouse, it will mess up your whole crop. So nobody wants a male plant, but I'm like, I gotta grow a male plant. So I had to get a lot of seeds and looking for just a male plant. And in the end, I think I grew like 5 or 8 or 10 male plants, and just to get this one shot, along with a couple others, which is the next shot too. So this is the pollen. It's airborne, and they produce one male plant will produce billions of these little tiny pollen grains that will basically wreck any female plant around as far as THC production is concerned. So here's this is what goes on. That male pollen lands on the female plant on a special structure, and it starts to exchange genetic material, and in the end produces a seed. So what I wanted to do was take the male pollen from the male plants, find a female plant, put it together, and get the action of the exchange of genetic material all in one shot. So it was a lot of work.
What makes a plant capable of being used for building materials or textiles?
That's the stalks, and I didn't put any stock pictures in here. So I figured for being short and keeping it relatively a short talk, I would leave the stalks and the fiber aspects of THC out of it. And I could just say, oh, you could get the book that goes into details on that at Shop 1 at the RIT campus, or from your online broker of books.
And on Amazon, that's where I got mine. And
on Amazon. So one of the things, we'll leave marijuana behind, and we'll move over to guns next, because geez, I could have combined marijuana, guns, alcohol. Geez. So here's bullets. I teach a high-speed class, and one of the classic things to do is to get all the fruit you can from Wegmans and shoot it with a gun, because why not? So we use high-speed flashes and trigger systems. So I've got kind of tired of trigger systems that weren't working very well. So I redesigned all the trigger systems. And when I say a trigger system, it's a way of sensing where the bullet is using optical detectors to set off a high-speed flash when the bullet gets to just the location you want to take a picture. So this is the kind of thing that I teach all the time in high-speed imaging. So I decided to learn how to do PCB production and design. And here's a layout for a light sheet infrared detector that I put together. And here's the final light sheet detector in the circuit. There's 2 per trigger system, as well as 2 light sources. And I was really interested in photographing some much higher speed bullets than the ones we do in class. And we're only allowed to shoot 22 calibers on campus with us, with security. Security's there photographing, actually setting off the gun as we photograph it. So I got together with some friends down in Virginia and some pretty well-known photographers down there, and we had a big shootout one day. And this is a 30-06, which is pretty much the fastest, biggest bullet that you could shoot accurately, and it's used a lot in military applications and such. And this is with a trigger system that I put together, and it shoots at 2,880 feet per second. So that's about as fast as you're going to shoot anything, and we're able to capture the bullet in midair as it's going by. And you can see that there's a little bit of a blur, and that's because of the high-speed flash it does have a little bit of a tail with the flash, which is responsible for that streak as it goes by. So I was able to make this, and the problem with taking pictures of bullets in flight is that really nobody wants to buy them and put them on the cover of their books or in their magazines or talk about them much, because it's fairly violent, and so there has to be something better to do with bullets. So I took that high-speed trigger systems, and I started to think, okay, let's the COVID's going on at this point, so I'm like, okay, I got to get a bunch of these projects I put aside done. So this is an air cannon I built. Specifically, the reason for building the air cannon is to get high-speed objects moving, so I can test out different kinds of trigger systems without setting off bullets in the backyard, pretty much. So this is a pencil, and it turns out you can build a pretty simple air cannon, and it shoots a pencil at just below the speed of sound. And I put this picture on Instagram, and the #1 comment I got was, man, I hate all those seltzers. You should shoot all the seltzers. So it's kind of odd that here's a very complicated picture and complicated trigger systems, and they're just like, seltzers. So if you can shoot pencils at 950 feet per second, you have to start sending them through apples. And it turns out that no pencil is going to go through an apple and still stay as a pencil as it goes through the apple. And here it shatters into thousands of little fragments. By the way, pencils go through a half-inch sheet of plywood, no problem at 950 feet per second. So these kinds of pictures are kind of violent, though, and nobody really wants them. So what else do you do with a high-speed detector that can trigger flashes when the bullet gets to a certain object? Well, it occurred to me that that would be perfect for looking at snowfall. So I reconfigured the code for the bullet detector and uses a snowflake detector. And since I have 2 triggers, as the snow comes down, it triggers the first optical sensor. The snowflake's falling at a constant rate. It triggers the second optical detector. I know the distance between the 2 sensors. I can come up with a velocity, and then I can look at how long the beam A was broken for and get an idea of the snowflake size, and then look at the second beam being broken and see how that size corresponds with the size that's generated from beam A. And of course, you love graphs because this is Excel. So here's a graph of the x-axis, here's velocity, and the y-axis is size of snowflakes. So we've gone from shooting bullets to basically collecting data on snowflakes. And this is what a typical couple minutes of a snowfall looks like here in Rochester. You got these grouping of snowflakes. So like a lot of my projects, I've been meaning to write it up. I just haven't got a chance to write this project up yet. And it's only 2 years old. So one of these days I'll write it up.
Ted, it's Kelly. I just wanted to let you know you're getting quite a few comments of how innovative and awesome you are. So I just wanted to give you a little plug.
Okay, well, thank you.
You're doing a great job.
The nuts, it's a little crazy sometimes. But anyhow, it's kind of a neat experiment. And if anybody wants like buckets of data, this device will collect snowfall data on a second-by-second basis. So for what it's worth, who knows? So, I work in an art school, and so I end up kind of doing these weird things. And one of them was I thought it would be kind of interesting to make pictures out of coffee. And so this became the coffee printer. And the coffee printer makes different size drips. The darker the pixel is, the bigger the drip of coffee. And this is a project I put together in a couple of weeks before school started back a few years. And it keeps reappearing in different forms. It can print coffee, it can print wine, tea, anything you can come up with, it can run it through here. And the calibrations are kind of interesting. And it's kind of a fun thing. The paper bends, you put a lot of water on paper bends. So here's a typical simple version of it. This is a version 1. I usually put these together and then I show them at the Make Fair, and we'll come back to the idea of Make Fair and getting young kids interested in science, which is one of my kind of driving forces. So you can see it prints about 8,000 pixels, and it makes some nice patterns, and some people look at it and think it's artwork, and it got a lot of traction. It went kind of viral on the web, and a lot of people like, oh, coffee, you know, what else can you do with it? So when you calibrate a picture, it can look pretty good. So this is one of our former students. Of course, when you put down too much coffee, the paper does wiggle quite a bit. And this, the highlight in the cheek here is where the paper bowed too much and hit the dripper. But that's, sometimes you get those mistakes. You go, oh, that's art sauce. So here's a guy that we've probably seen before. This is Professor Frank Cost here, and his portrait done in coffee. I usually don't point this out, but I let Frank know when I did this. You see that the pixels are squished in the vertical direction, and they're squished by just a couple percent. So once I printed this out, I realized that I had to fix that spacing problem a little bit in the code.
Ted, we had a question about code.
Sure.
I think it's in reference to the snowflakes. Could you code in an if A then B action when using a two-step program like this?
You can do anything you can imagine. You can, all sorts of stuff can be done. You have to figure out, the snowflakes are really slow. Snowflakes don't move very fast at all. So, and these microprocessors are moving at 6 megahertz or 12 megahertz, depending on your processor. So they can do an awful lot.
We've got our, what coding language do you actually use?
The Arduino language, I like doing a lot of Arduino stuff. So the Arduino language is pretty similar to C++.
Okay. And did you ever try stretching the paper before adding the coffee?
No, I can tape it down, or I don't know. I thought about vacuum chucks and all sorts of stuff, but I mean, it's coffee on paper. Really, I can't. You know, we gotta. The whole goal here is not to have a really good picture, but just to make a picture, because somebody invented this thing called dot matrix printers, and they're pretty good at it. There's a lot of people working really high quality printers, and this is the opposite end of the spectrum. This is a low quality junky printer with coffee, and half the time it clogs. So that's a problem. So my wife is from Texas, and she says I got to do a picture in Dr. Pepper for the Dr. Pepper Museum. And what better thing would you pick than the Mona Lisa, which is copyright free, and anything involving the Mona Lisa is considered art. So so I printed Dr. Pepper Mona Lisa and asked the Dr. Pepper Museum in Waco, Texas, if they would like it in their collection. And they answered back, yes, they want it in their collection. And here it is shown in their vault. And it really is an old bank vault that they've turned into their art studio. And it's at the end of the vault. And I have to shoot it at an angle here, otherwise you get all the lights on it. But they were very nice, and they invited me out to Waco, and we got some free Dr. Pepper coupons, and had a great time touring Dr. Pepper Museum. So back to my students, I do a lot of stuff with water because water is relatively safe. It's easy to clean up, and it can move pretty fast in a splash. So these are some splash patterns that I did with my students this past year. We're using 3 LEDs, and those 3 LEDs are strobed. You can turn on and off an LED very, very fast with a microprocessor, and the microprocessor controls the splash. So here is, it's photographing the bottom of a ground glass pan as water's dripped in it using 3 different light sources that are flashed. And you can also do high-speed images of this with movies. So one of the things I've done for a long time with my students is to do what's called a double drip experiment, where you have one drip come down as it recoils up. Just as it is the top of its recoil, a second drip collides with it and makes this beautiful splash pattern. And these splash patterns, they're gone in an instant. So it's a great event to learn timing, programming, electronics, and combined with a little bit of high-speed flashes. And you can get these, it's a macro picture taken, this object's about 1 inch across. And you're changing the background and light in the background for these little double water drip splashes. And they've become very popular. The students really like them a lot, and they're fun to do, and nobody's ever hurt with them. So I like those. So this is a recent project that I just did with a high-speed class, which is a project called Water Bells. And if you shoot a jet of water up with a compressed air, you can kind of get a similar effect where the top column of water falls back on itself and creates these bell-shaped patterns. And these are about 6 to 8 inches across, and they're not super fast, but they're fun to program and they're fun to make. And the students really like challenging things, as well as things you can get some pretty pictures out of. So you remember this COVID thing where you're kind of stuck at home and you're like, man, we could watch Netflix, or we could make a polarization interferometer. So for years, I've sort of thought about polarization interferometer, and they're really expensive optics. And I just wasn't going to spend the $8,000 on the optics. So I figured I would grind my own. So this is a chunk of synthetic quartz. And you have to figure out the correct axes of these before you start slicing this up and making polarization optics out of it. And the problem is I got a chunk of synthetic quartz, and I looked at my old textbook from the 40s or 50s or whenever it was from grinding quartz, and the optical axes were wrong. They've updated and changed their optical axes since I was using new references to look at the axes I need to cut. And I just said, oh, the optical axis is off this reference from the 1940s, which was wrong. So I spent 3 weeks grinding and cutting quartz on the wrong axis, and had to verify the right axis. So if you get a chunk of quartz and you put it, if you're looking straight down the optical axis and it's between 2 sheets of polarization material, you see this bullet pattern, and that's how you identify the optical axis. So what you need to do is you need to build 2 wedges, each cut at a different angle, and each taking about a week to grind. So you make about 4 or 5 of them at the same time. And here's one of them. It's a 5 degrees Wallstein prism. And I left out all the grinding pictures and the pitch pictures. Pitch, you have to put black, basically pine tar on special mounts and then use that as a polishing. And I built polishers in the basement and grinding. And my wife's like, are you gonna be cutting rocks in the basement again? I'm like, no, those aren't rocks. Those are quartz crystals. We're actually doing something here. So this is a Wallstein prism invented in the 1880s, I guess, by a famous British scientist who's considered one of the first really brilliant polarization optical geniuses. So what this does is if you put it in an optical interferometer, which means you send light paths out to a mirror, it comes back, it reconstructs the wave front, and everything's good except that if you have something in there that messes up the wave front, you can visualize it. So that would be stresses in the air or shock waves in the air. And this is the Wall Stream prism that I ground, showing a bullet in flight, showing the shock wave of the bullet in flight with polarization optics. So I've done a lot of complicated projects in my time, but this one took the cake. This was basically 3 months. And when I say it was a grind, it really, really was a grind. In all senses of the word, it was a grind. It was a really tough project to do. But I also ended up with 3 different kinds of optical elements that I wanted to experiment with for a while. So kind of a fun project. So going back to my wife, she goes, can't sit around. You gotta get more exercise. You can't be doing stuff on the computer all the time. You gotta do something. You need to ride your bike more. So I thought, well, I guess I probably should ride my bike more. How could I make my bike more fun to ride? Let's put a spirograph on the front of the bike. So I started designing a spirograph that could go on the front of a bicycle. And of course, the project of this was originally like, oh yeah, let's get some exercise. But the sub project here was to get young kids interested in mechanics and physics and some of the cool things. And everybody loves spirographs. So let's design a bicycle powered spirograph. And so this actually goes on the front of the bicycle. And in this first iteration, it was 2 miles for a pattern. And I really enjoyed riding it around, and the neighbors kind of like, oh, there's Kinsman riding his spirograph bike again. As the front wiggles all around, does all this stuff. It's really pretty cool. But 2 miles for a pattern is pretty tough if you're trying to demonstrate some mechanics. It's way beyond the patience level for a normal kid. So I started redesigning it, and you think a lot about the patterns that you can make and the mathematics of these patterns, and what you can do. And this is an early prototype here. So I worked on these all summer and kept upgrading and modifying everything, and thinking about which of the patterns would be most interesting and fun. And here's the final version of it. It has, you get to the point where you go like, if I'm going to design this, I really need to design it to a point where even a professional engineer will look at it and be like, what in the world is going on here? So this version has the front part of the spirograph is on a cam and wiggles in and out to get this collapsed spirograph pattern with these loopy patterns, which is kind of fun. So I end up with these kinds of patterns, which I thought were somewhat new and unique. I'd never seen them before. And this pattern you get on the bike, you ride the bike around, and it does it in 0.2 miles. So that's within a tolerance of a young person getting on a bicycle and having a pattern that they could ride the bike and then take away with saying like, wow, that was kind of cool.
Yeah, this is Kelly. You got a comment or two here that they love this. It's so cool. I just want to say this is one of my favorite projects that you shared with me, and I would really love you to come to the Alumni House.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's bring the bike in. Everyone can ride it. They can leave with their own pattern.
That's exactly it. I think we could have a party around it, actually.
It would be good. I can go back to this other page here, and here's the interesting thing. You want to design it to have enough variables that can do some really interesting things. And the location of the pen is the first variable. It's an X and Y location. So that'll really mess you up in your calculations. But the really bizarre thing about this is there's a phase difference between all these gears. And if you change any of the phase differences, you can end up with a completely different pattern, which is really tricky. It's basically, you could think of it mathematically, it's like 5 or 6 sine waves, and they all have to be in phase to get the pattern that you see here. If I change one of their phases by 180 degrees, things get kind of crazy real fast, which is a lot of fun. But you need variables, because who wants to ride the bike 2 times to get the same pattern? You got to get a little different. So this kind of goes back to the Victorian era. It turns out that in the 1880s, the Victorians are really interested in stereo vision. And it turns out that you can make stereo patterns with a spirograph too, by doing 2 patterns, one with a phase difference between the 2 patterns. So in this case, the red has 1 phase difference, the blue has a different phase difference, and that phase difference will help generate a 3D picture. So you can actually make 3D pictures this way with your spirograph bike.
Does the word harmonograph mean anything to you?
Harmonographs are kind of interesting. They do have some kind of cool mathematics associated with them. Harmonographs usually two oscillating surfaces with a damping coefficient, which brings the pen down to a point. Yes, and harmonographs were the first inspiration for understanding that people were looking at 3-dimensional pictures.
Yeah, Ted, we've got a couple of more comments that I wanted to share with you, and also to up that we're sort of well into the program here.
Yep.
Absolutely loving the rabbit hole this presentation has taken us on. This is fantastic.
Well, I cut out 2 huge rabbit holes. And if anybody's really interested, I could tell that I have made a reproduction geometric chuck, which there's 6 of those in museums around the world. But I built one out of stepping motors that can be programmed, and that's
oh, wonderful.
That's just pure craziness. I cut that whole thing out of here because I didn't want to talk about.
We'll save it for next time.
You could do geometric patterns, talk 2, and not
Ted Kinsman 2.0.
Another
comment here is, it looks like a child's toy spirograph, but this one's for adults with a smiley face. And I figure if we're starting with Cannabis and ending up with spirograph, that's pretty fun.
Yeah, you never know where the science is going to take you. You gotta have a little bit of fun. I would not recommend driving the spirograph bike around, so I have it on a stand for exercise.
Yeah, I can imagine you getting captivated watching and hitting.
No, the balance is kind of weird. It's really kind of heavy on the front end of the bicycle, and you realize that every time you ride it about 10 miles, you're like, oh, I got to change that gear ratio, or this has to be modified over here, and it sort of never ends. But
Alexander's asking if you have a 3D offset GIF of the spirograph so we can appreciate the 3D aspect of it.
No, I don't. No, I don't really want to get into all the details, but there's a really interesting conundrum between 2 different coordinate systems. If you put a light on the spirograph, you get a different pattern than if you put a pen on the spirograph. And that's because of two relative coordinate system differences. And doing the calculations between those 2 is some really bizarre math. So
Catherine is suggesting you use a stereo anaglyph glasses.
Yes, yeah, you can actually. This one does, it does.
Oh, you have them right there.
Yeah, of course. You always have to have some around for all your emergencies. It does do a little bit of 3D, but it needs to be optimized for some other
We've
stuff.
got a couple of folks who said this is really interesting. We need to do this again. And then Carl says, Ted, loving your talk. Amazing imagery you haven't shown me before. Love the interferometry image.
Interferometry, yeah. Carl and I talked a lot about interferometry, and I thought I'd sent some pictures to his way, but I might not have.
He says he loves the Corollas effect and the shockwave and the new spirograph design.
Oh. Well, the last thing I want to get to is I want to thank my wife for putting up with me and all of my crazy projects. So
yes, and Jennifer says she thinks that your wife is on quite a ride.
My wife is a special lady. There's no doubt about it. She's a COVID nurse, and she's with the COVID patients today, right now. So.
And we appreciate that.
Me too. She's a very good soul. So, any questions? I'd be more than happy to answer them and try to set people on some crazy straights and some crazy
Well,
directions.
You've got half a dozen thank yous to your wife, so I don't.
She needs more than that, I tell her.
Yeah, and a lot of
she's a great, holy cow. Yeah, we do all sorts of fun projects that we get into together. So she's a really good sport.
So do you have more to show us?
I'm going to stop there and say that's it, and I'm not going to get into the other stuff.
Right.
Unless people want, I can bring up the other PowerPoint and show other goodies. So
I have a couple of questions here to share with you.
Sure.
Does the snowflake detector detect volume? What happens if they fall sideways or long? They're shaped like a pancake.
That is one of the problems. So if a snowflake falls sideways, you get a smaller cross section. So it's sort of an average. You're never going to get the perfect measurements of snowflakes. It's always going to be within this statistical thing. But the interesting thing is that the terminal velocity is related to their size. And I think that could be useful for doing some meteorological work. But I really should write that up, but I just haven't, it's such a fun project.
You're having more fun actually inventing things, I think.
And that's the problem. I work on so many different projects, and I'm like, oh, I should write that up. But then, someone will call and they'll be like, oh, I need this. And then you're taken off on a different direction. So
I have a couple more questions here. One of them is, how about legal hurdles for growing cannabis in New York State and documenting it as you have? Did you run into any legal hurdles?
It was totally, completely illegal. And I'm gonna tell you that right now. But
tell you this webinar is being recorded, correct?
Yeah, there we go. But it can also tell you that most of the cannabis that I grew had 0 THC in it. It was, there's a university nearby that has a researcher that has optimized cannabis plants for 0 THC for paper production. And when I mentioned it to him, he says, just share me some pictures, and here's a kilo of seeds. So yeah, and what do you do with a kilo of cannabis seeds? But you do feed them to the birds, and the birds just love them. So and then after I did that, I had some friends that'd be like, oh, I really wanted to grow some cannabis, but those are plants that grow. I think they max out at around 15 feet, and they grow wicked fast. Wow. So those researchers have been working very, very hard to optimize hemp production for fibers, starting in the early 70s, and they come up with some really nice strains.
What surprised you the most with the cannabis microscopic images?
I guess just, how mostly about how passionate a lot of the cannabis people, there's a couple groups of plant people that are really, really passionate about plants, and cannabis people are very passionate about plants. And one group that you would not expect to be so crazy passionate is thistle people. So steer clear of the thistle people, because they are cannabis people I can deal with. The thistle people are nuts, because they worship the thistle plant as, I shouldn't say this aloud, and especially if we're being recorded, because they'll come after me. But they're very, very adamant about the health quality of thistle plants. So who knew?
Who knew?
But the cannabis, it's kind of interesting, and you know, as I talk to these people, I just talked to a guy that's a pretty well-known book writer earlier this week, and he's like, yeah, you know, it's the pandemic, and you compare the cannabis or the THC to alcohol. And I'm like, well, they're probably the same. You know, you got the pandemic, the alcohol sales have gone through the roof. We're going to be seeing this when this pandemic's over. We're going to have a lot of problems with alcohol issues.
I have 4 more questions left.
Okay.
That'll be, and 4 minutes to do them.
Yeah, but there turns out to be a different consumption between THC and alcohol. They don't seem to be following each other, which really surprised a lot of the THC people.
We have Rob asking what your favorite cannabis photo is, and what cannabis photo would you have liked to have taken that didn't happen?
Oh, I don't know. You get kind of tired of taking pictures of cannabis. They really look all the same after being on it for about a year. I'm like, okay, I'm tired of this. My favorite picture would probably be like the picture I just took this afternoon. I can show it, maybe. Can I do that? Can I?
Yeah.
I can. I have to find. I don't know. I've got to find like a Photoshop thing here.
Well, we also have a
Anyhow,
suggestion that you should work with Michael Perez on a snowflake photos. You guys would be,
Michael Perez, good friend of mine. We often talk about snowflake photography together.
I think you had to do snowflakes on cannabis myself, but that's, you know.
We probably could, for what it's worth. I'm sure somebody's done it. There's a good friend of ours, Ken Lebret, is an expert at growing snowflakes in the lab out in Caltech. Really some very, very interesting work. And he just published his definitive lifetime work of 600 pages of snowflake physics.
Oh.
So it's really and it's free on the web. You can download it free, and prepare yourself, because it's material science, crazy levels of complexity. So
2 questions left, 2 minutes to go.
okay.
Colette loves looking at your work through her somewhat neurotypical visual sense. She's wondering about individuals with autism diagnosis, and that focuses in her area of work, and their feelings about the visual processing required to view them. So she just wanted me to check in with you on that.
Well, I should okay, I should try to open this last picture that I worked on just this afternoon, just because it's so weird. If I go to my desktop, I love going through all this stuff here.
Looks like in the middle of your presentation.
Yeah, just because you can, right?
Yeah,
that looks good. Let's try that one. Can people see my desktop?
No, you need to do a new screen share.
Okay, we'll try that. Oh, killing me here. I guess I got to stop this screen share. I don't even know how to do that here. I don't know. We're stuck. I can't get rid of, because it's taken over everything here.
Here, let me see if I can help from this end.
Oh no, okay, there it is. Okay, I got to stop that share. It was behind the picture. And then I go to share screen again. Here we go. So this is, how about that? Can you see that?
What is that?
That is doing vector tracing of a soap film with the little soap bubbles.
Whoa.
Isn't that trippy?
That is crazy.
And that's what I love about, a lot of this photography is like, what the heck is that? How does that work? And ways of visualizing that stuff. So if you look at really crazy pictures, this is kind of, I'm always thinking about time and how time relates to pictures and how we can show time. And so this is 3 or 4 seconds of a soap bubble flowing on a surface, all shown in one picture. And these are all the different little vectors or little things that the different ways that those objects are moving on a sheet of soap.
So if we go back to Colette, and she basically is saying, I'm wondering about individuals with an autism diagnosis and their feelings about the visual processing required to view them.
Yeah, it can be.
It can be overwhelming, I would think.
Yeah, it would be difficult. And the trouble I have, and the reason I got rid of some of these pictures in this PowerPoint is that I have to explain like what the heck this thing is, and how this was taken, and why am I doing this? And this is actually for a client on that I do these patterns for backgrounds on TV shows and such like that. And this is for one of those, but I kind of modified it a
looks
little
like
bit.
the inside of a car wash.
Doesn't it? It's, who knows? It's weird.
Yeah.
Then that's what I love. You end up with these pictures that are like, oh, it's color and it's motion and it's intriguing and you want to know more. And that takes you down into the world of science and what's going on there and the fluid dynamics and
last question for you, since we've just breached 7:01.
Okay.
What are you working on now, and what are the projects that you're gearing up to?
I am working on a surf documentary for a client, a couple little pictures. And matter of fact, this probably will be one of them in one way or the other. So that's for a European client.
Cool.
But it's only going to be a couple seconds in a documentary.
But that's really exciting for you.
Kind of fun. There's some other fluid dynamic shots too. But you do this project and you're like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. And then you apply it to something else. So you think of like, oh, what can I do with that? And I'm sort of gearing up for probably writing a big textbook on controlling cameras with Arduinos, but I don't know. We've got a crazy spring coming up with classes, and it's going to be a very, very busy spring. So.
Well, thank you very much, Ted.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. I'd love to take the spiral bike out to your show and
absolutely
let everyone ride it around.
But thanks for sharing your passion and your knowledge with all of us.
Great.
There's more to come.
Yep. Thank you for having me here tonight.
Oh, it was wonderful. I just wanted to let all the audience know that you will receive an email from us within a week or so with a link to today's webinar recording. So if you had to, if you came late or left early, you'll be receiving something from us and you'll be able to catch up on the spots that you missed. As a reminder, these Tiger webinars are available on the RIT Alumni Association YouTube site. And I am posting the link right now as we speak, so you can capture it if you'd like. You can view the full listing of upcoming virtual events at rit.edu/alumni/events. Put that in the chat box as well. And I just want to say thank you, one and all. We have several of these a week and on a variety of topics, everything from wine and food pairing to circular economics to natural versus prescription, lots and lots of different topics. This one was wonderful, Ted. The imagery was fabulous, very engaging.
Thank you.
You're wonderful.
Thanks. It's a crazy world of science.
Yeah. So please exit this webinar by simply closing your browser window. And please do let us know what you thought of the webinar through a brief survey you'll receive in the email as well. Have a wonderful week. Stay safe, stay positive, and stay your course. Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you.
They're still signing off, Ted. Thanks, Adam. I didn't double check. Thank you. And thanks, Jennifer. Really appreciate it. Night, everyone.